Good morning. A few of our members are traveling from the western part of the state and some from Lancaster. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the meeting started. Hopefully they'll join us because it's my intention to end the hearing between 11 and 11:30 because of other commitments. The testifiers, we have a list of testifiers, and I've added one who is the maker of one of the bills that we're going to be discussing, and that's Representative Dave Millard. So if you don't mind, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And then afterwards, please stand for a moment of silence. I know it's been across the state what's happened here in Monroe County to the three victims of that horrific tragedy over at Ross Township a couple of weeks ago. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to thank the members and the testifiers that are going to be testifying today. Today is a public hearing and in many weeks to discuss the committee's continuing efforts to secure meaningful prevailing wage reform, particularly two proposals which will become the preeminent legislation initiatives this session, House Bills 796 and 665. Prevailing wage is a complex and often contentious issue. Many legislators and stakeholders hold conflicting views regarding the costs and benefits associated with Prevailing Wage Act. Keeping that in mind, I will do my very best to ensure that everyone has a chance to be heard and the members have an opportunity to question the testifiers as they see fit. I look forward to gathering valuable input and perspective from our expert panels, which I hope illustrate the effects of the prevailing wage on the local level. Representative Millard? Let me stop. Let the members here introduce themselves. Then, as they show up, I will have the others introduce as well. I'm State Representative Mario Scabello, the Chairman of the Labor and Industry Committee. Okay.
No, Carl, I'm the Labor and Industry Committee staff.
Good morning, Mike Pfeiffer. I represent the 139th District, which includes Pike, Wayne, and Monroe counties.
Good morning, State Representative Mark Gillen from Berks County.
Good morning, Rosemary Brown, the 189th District from here in Monroe County and also Pike County.
Just in time, gentlemen.
Morning, Brian Cutler, Southern Lancaster County, 100th District.
Good morning, Ryan Ahmet, 41st District, Lancaster County.
Okay. Representative Millard.
And I'm Representative David Millard from Columbia County. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this invite to offer testimony on House Bill 796 today. As most of you are aware, the Prevailing Wage Act was adopted in 1961 and requires all public bodies, which is defined in the Commonwealth as any of its political subdivisions, any authority created by the General Assembly, and any instrumentality or agency of the Commonwealth to pay prevailing wage rates for services that are performed on a public works project which has a total estimated cost exceeding $25,000. My bill would simply raise the threshold for applicability to this law to $100,000. There are currently 18 states that have no prevailing wage law. There are 9 other states that have a $100,000 threshold or higher. The last time in our Commonwealth that the threshold was raised or established was in 1963, 2 years after the law was originally adopted. 50 years ago, $25,000 was established as a threshold in this Commonwealth. And we all know that since then until now, cost of materials have gone up, wages have certainly gone up. I doubt very much that you could build, and I know for a fact that you couldn't even build a two-car garage for $25,000. Yet that's exactly what we expect our townships, our very small townships, in excess of 1,000 of them across the Commonwealth, to do. And it leaves them one option when they exceed the $25,000, and that is to raise their taxes. Raise their taxes on some people in very large geographic rural areas that have large tracts of land, farmers that are getting by, having a struggle to make ends meet, and are being asked to pay even more. If the current $25,000 threshold were to be adjusted for inflation, it would equal just under $188,000. According to the Department of Labor and Industry, in 2012, there were a total of 6,506 prevailing wage projects, which cost approximately $6.3 billion. 39% of the projects were estimated to cost $100,000 and below. Projects below $100,000 totaled $149 million. And if you compare this to the previous statistic that I gave you, this equates to about 2% of the total cost of all projects in 2012. What my bill does is it provides flexibility to our small townships to do what they have always done. They're not going to change. They're not going to necessarily expand the scope of projects that they're doing. They do projects on demand. They do projects on demand from individuals like you and I. When we've got a road on the way to our home that needs to be repaired, that through weather conditions and driving and all other factors erodes and needs to have proper drainage on, it needs to be repaired. It needs to be fixed. And at the current level of $25,000, that small road project gets ballooned out of shape with regards to cost. I look at this bill as being very helpful to well over 1,000 plus small townships across this Commonwealth. I look at this bill as being a stimulus package, if you will, that we're looking at a small percentage of projects, 2% or less, but certainly with regard to product cost and everything and factories that make these products, it's going to provide continuity at the very least as far as employment in those facilities. So I'll conclude with that thought, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and I would welcome any questions or comments that you have at this time. Thank you.
Any comments or questions from any of the members? Okay. Representative, if you don't mind today, if you could join us, since you chose.
Thank you,
Please.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The next presenter is Jay Wilkes, Supervisor, Jackson Township, Luzerne County.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having me here today. Good morning. My name is Jay Wilkes. I've been a chairman of the Jackson Township Board of Supervisors for the past 16 years. I've been on the road department and the roadmaster for 26 years. Jackson Township is located in neighboring Luzerne County with a population of 4,646 people. We have over 39 miles of road. I am currently the president of the Luzerne County Association of Township Officials, the deputy chief for the Back Mountain Regional Emergency Services and Emergency Management, and chairman of the Back Mountain Community Partnership that we have as a COG. Additionally, I'm here today as an executive board member for the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. Thank you for the opportunity again to be here today on behalf of Jackson Township and the 1,455 townships which PSATs and I represent. I'd like to discuss the prevailing wage Reform, which is very important to townships that I represent, our shared constituents, and the rest of the townships across the Commonwealth. The Prevailing Wage Act was first adopted in 1961 to implement the provisions of the Federal Davis-Bacon Act for public works projects in the state and local funding. Additionally adopted with the threshold of $2,000, the new law led to such an outcry from local governments that the threshold was increased to $25,000. Just 2 years later, now 50 years later, this rate remains unchanged, while in recent court interpretations has applied to the Act provisions and borders array of the projects. One thing I'd like to tell the board is I am 43 years old. I've been an elected official most of my life, and this has been a 50-year project. So I just want to bring that in, that I feel that it's definitely something that really needs to be looked at. Okay, you have heard in the past, and we'll hear again today from both sides on the issue, with changes and examples to respective positions. What I'd like to share with you are 4 examples of increased cost under the current Prevailing Wage Act that I have experienced both with my township and the Back Mountain Regional Emergency Services, resulting in additional tax burdens on our constituents. Under the current law, I have seen cost of blacktopping in my township roads increase by 33% over every $100,000 spent. Actually, I feel that that number is a little low, and that number is closer to 38%. But we actually did give you factual numbers, so that's where we're trying to be there. This only includes the cost of blacktopping. It does not include the repairs of drainage and other road repairs. In my township, we can't afford to purchase blacktop through the Pennsylvania CoStarz program, but however, we cannot afford to lay the blacktop because the increased cost due to the prevailing wage threshold. The current $25,000 limit eliminates the cost of equates to a little over 900 feet of blacktop, not including the cost of the materials. It is virtually impossible to have a paving project where you can do this with paying prevailing wage. I have seen grants for recreational uses cut in almost half when forced to pay a prevailing wage, limiting the ability to improve our parks and recreation areas. Under emergency services, the use of emergency service grants is anywhere from 38 to 43% due to the increased cost of prevailing wage. As a result, the grant money does not provide the resources it could if the law were brought up today's equivalent amount. I'd like to just go on to the emergency services end. We receive LSA grants the same as Monroe County does, and under that grant that we received for emergency services, we actually have 38 to 43% that we cannot do. And one thing that I wanted to add, if I can, Mr. Chairman, is that the engineering cost is something that was overlooked when we gave this statement to NOAA. The engineering cost has changed 10 times, and I was told this yesterday. Because of the fact of the prevailing wage, they've had to go and readjust the project itself 10 times to try to bring the project within the scope of the budget. And I was unaware of that until yesterday. Additionally, the cost of upgrading an air conditioning unit and heating system in a township building has increased by almost 50%, more than it would have cost if we didn't have to comply with the prevailing wage cost. To alleviate these concerns, I would ask you and your colleagues to consider reform containing House Bill 796, which increases the prevailing wage threshold from $25,000 to at least $100,000. But without future cost of living adjustments, I would further suggest that the threshold be increased to $189,000 with the annual cost of living adjustment. With these changes, we would bring reform and prevailing wage up to more realistic figures, and the amount of the reflect the change, the increase the cost of living since 1963. And with the annual adjustment to reflect the inflation, there would be no reason for future adjustments by the General Assembly. I would ask that the legislature would be considerate and would maintain work on roads, highways, and bridges for compliance with the Act, including the replacement of guide rails, curbs, pavement overlays up to 3.5 inches, roads widening, and that does not result in additional lanes, bridges, or cleaning of resurfacing. specifically House Bill 665, which would eliminate the costly requirements of maintaining projects to comply with the prevailing wage that would address the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's 2008 Youngblood decision. Thank you again for having me today, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkes. Just one quick question. Has it, prevailing wage, has it stopped you sometimes in doing projects? For example, you didn't have enough money in your taxes.
Yes.
A road paving project or whatever else. It has affected.
Yes, it has, and it's affected all municipalities, whether it be boroughs or townships, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from the members?
Sir, you've been the roadmaster for 26 years.
Yes.
When did you start?
I started when I was 17 and a half years old.
I thought my math was correct, okay? Would you have a wagon and a broom? Or what? No.
No, I actually went right from high school to work.
Congratulations. That's admirable to stay with it as long as you have. When did you first notice this was a problem? You're 17 and a half years old. You're the roadmaster. When did this epiphany occur to you? Did someone bring it to your attention? In a real-world way, what was your first intersection with prevailing wage?
It actually probably within the last 15 years, to be quite honest, Representative, because back when blacktop was $10 a ton, the prevailing wage was probably more accurate when we didn't have the inflation that we have currently. Now, with materials being the price that they are, the prevailing wage, I believe, has really come to a head. And years ago, prevailing wage, even though it may have been outdated 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and never was brought up to speed, I think the cost of the materials that have gone up, up to 150%, has really taken the prevailing wage and brought it to the attention of municipalities. When I started, blacktop was $11 a ton. As of yesterday, it's $56 a ton. So what I'm getting at is we have less to work with, not just with the prevailing wage, but with the cost of materials. Everything was more economical 20, 25 years ago. And I think, like I said, I believe that back then you could do more for less. Now we're doing less for more. So.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Wilkes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to bring up Ed Kramer and Charlie Garris. Ed Kramer, Supervisor, Stroud Township, and Charlie, Vice Chair of the Monroe County Commissioners. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Kramer.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify at this hearing today. What I'm about to give testimony to is a perfect example of why prevailing wage law should be reformed. The project involves work done in 2012 on Poplar Valley Road Bridge, an open grate bridge with a span of 16 feet, which serves as a connector road between State Route 191 and Tots Gap Hill Road leading to Delaware Water Gap. The township requested and was awarded $75,000 from county liquid fuels money to help with the project with regard to either outright replacement or repair of this bridge. Through correspondence with the township's engineer, it was determined by PennDOT's bridge unit that repairs to the bridge would be adequate and would be considered maintenance work. The work to be done on the bridge included the following: bridge sandblasting and painting the entire structure. This was bid under prevailing wage and awarded to the low bidder at $44,000. Stone masonry, pointing and repair with a low bid of $7,555. Guide rail installation and upgrades with a low bid of $4,664.25. Milling and paving bridge approaches with low bid of $13,061. The township engineer and our solicitor determined that this work was 4 distinct and separate projects that could be bid separately as opposed to one project to a general contractor who would then have to hire subcontractors to do the various work required for this bridge. Copies of the emails from the engineer and solicitor are provided with this statement. The township was told by the county municipal service rep that he could not certify the project using liquid fuels money because it wasn't bid under one contract and prevailing wage laws. The total cost of the project under the 4 separate contracts totaled $69,280.25. By doing it this way, I personally feel it saved taxpayers a significant amount of money as opposed to awarding a bid to one general contractor under current prevailing wage laws. Thank you for your time and letting me testify today. If you have any questions with regards to this, I'd be happy to answer that.
Mr. Kramer, we're going to have Commissioner Garris first, and then we'll take questions. Okay? Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Scavello and fellow representatives. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today before the State House Labor and Industry Committee. As a part of the Board of Commissioners in Monroe County, I am responsible for utilizing the monetary assets entrusted to us in the most efficient manner so as to extend our resources to the fullest and minimize the negative impact on our taxpayers. And I want to restate that again, to minimize the negative impact on our taxpayers. Using competitive bidding process, some mandated by law, we must find the best value for our citizens while maintaining quality services. We have discovered that during times of tight budgets, the focus on funding core services, and often because of the cost, even moderately priced building improvements are left undone. Since cost estimates on many projects can be as much as 20% higher due to prevailing wage requirements. When I consider the intent of the prevailing wage law, I do not believe it was to minimize the number of projects let out for bid. The fact is, as an unintended consequences, most municipalities and county governments will not fund as many building projects when the cost of a few jobs, even small jobs costing over $25,000, require the payment of prevailing wage. I would appeal to you to please consider the job growth, as much as paying a fair wage, should be priorities for our legislators. If we inject more money into infrastructure and building projects, we could create more opportunity for our local and smaller businesses. The wage rates to be paid should be determined by the free job market, not legislators in Harrisburg. In 2013, Monroe County completed 2 projects. One project, the renovation of courtroom number 1, worth $39,872, and is being funded entirely with county money and a bond issue. Not paying prevailing wage could have saved the county $10,337. In another case, we just completed a project on repairing the parking deck drainage system. This project cost is funded by a bond issue. The total cost of this project was $82,034. Not paying prevailing wage could have saved $21,268. The remaining issues of concern to me, based on the projection of $25,000 impact over 40 years of inflation since 1961, the prevailing wage lower threshold should surely be in the range of $185,000 to $190,000 to truly have a positive impact on correcting the cost problem we experience. Thank you for your time and attention given to this very important local government issue.
Any questions? Just one thing, Ed. On your totals, the 4 items that would have been bid out individually or prevailing wage, and then your last number, it's actually higher on the 4 separate contracts totaled. What did it end up costing you? What did the project cost?
I added all 4 separate.
Oh, you added them together.
Together.
Okay.
Was a $69,000.
Did you do the project?
Yes, we did do the project.
When
we submitted for the reimbursement for county liquid fuels, the PennDOT service, municipal service rep would not certify. Contacted Labor and Industry Council. There's a four-way test on whether it would meet. And unfortunately, because the total project was over 25, we should have gone out to bid under one contract, which then, like I said, would have had to been subcontracted out. These are certainly 4 distinct jobs that no one contractor could do.
Got it.
And I'm going to guess that the whole project, if it were bid as one, would have been well over 120,000. So I felt we saved significant amount of money. Fortunately, I sent a letter to the county. We have other projects that are a lot more money that need to be done. I asked them to reassign that $75,000 in county liquid fuels to another project. We were healthy. Our fund balance, our general fund balance is healthy. We were able to cover this cost because it was a reasonably cost of this whole project to begin with.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was asked if I can move 2 members up. If Alan Everett, the president of Pocono Mountain Council of Governments, and Jim Phillips, the East Stroudsburg Borough Manager, if you gentlemen could come up. Thank you. Mr. Everett, I'd like to start. And you're also the chairman of the Hamilton Township Supervisors, am I correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. As Chairman Scavello stated, I'm Alan Everett, Chairman of the Board of Hamilton Township Supervisors, and also President of the Pocono Mountain Council of Governments, an organization which incorporates 20 municipalities in Monroe County and 1 in Pike County. I am pleased to testify before the committee today concerning the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act and to voice my support for 2 pieces of legislation which aim to reform the Act as it is currently administered. As you are aware, the Act requires that the prevailing minimum wage be paid to workmen on publicly funded construction, reconstruction, repair, demolition, or alteration projects where the total estimated cost exceeds $25,000. In fact, prevailing wage rates must be applied to a project even if the public contribution is $1 and the labor and material components cost $24,999. Because there is no cost of living adjustment or CPI index escalator for the prevailing wage threshold in current statute, the threshold can only be increased with legislative action. In 1963, the Pennsylvania General Assembly voted to raise the prevailing wage threshold from $2,000 to its current level, $25,000. In 1963, John F. Kennedy was our president. A gallon of gasoline cost 25 cents, and the national average annual income narrowly exceeded $5,000. It is important to note that if an inflation escalator were applied to the current threshold, the Act would apply only to projects exceeding $188,000. Since 1963, the cost of living was increased 7-fold. Coupled with the rising cost of supplies, the $25,000 threshold applies to virtually every public infrastructure project here in Monroe County and indeed throughout the Commonwealth. As of 2013, 15 other states have higher prevailing wage thresholds than Pennsylvania. Of course, 18 states do not have a prevailing wage law whatsoever. The bottom line is an adjustment to the prevailing wage threshold is long past due. Raising the figure in accordance with inflation or preferably higher would allow local government organizations to complete smaller construction projects at a reasonable fair market cost, keep property taxes under control, and balance their budgets. Another core function of state and local government is to maintain the safety, dependability, and performance of our infrastructure systems. In our area, hundreds of thousands of dollars of infrastructure needs go unmet every year because of one particularly onerous mandate relating to maintenance work. Maintenance work, which is defined in the Act as the repairing of existing facilities when the size, type, or extent of such facilities not changed or increased, is exempt from the state prevailing wage requirement. Legislatively, counteracting the infamous Youngwood and Ebensburg court cases by once again classifying road milling and repaving, as well as sidewalk and curb repair, as maintenance and not reconstruction, will allow taxpayer dollars to be further stretched, resulting in more jobs, more completed projects, and safer roads and bridges for us all. Given the facts at hand, it is clear that Pennsylvania must make changes to their prevailing wage policies. In a time when local governments are receiving dramatically less tax contributions from the state and other sources, amending the Pennsylvania's Prevailing Wage Act to keep up with our ever-changing economy would give local elected officials much-needed help in balancing their budgets and relieve the citizens of Pennsylvania from more unnecessary tax increases. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jim Phillips. I'm manager of East Stroudsburg Borough and have been the manager since 1995. East Stroudsburg Borough has a population of 9,840 and encompasses an area of 2.6 square miles. The borough is a full-service local government, providing police services through our regional police department, fire protection through volunteer fire company, public water and sewage service, building inspections and code enforcement, garbage and recycling collection and disposal, flood protection, public health services, parks, including a swimming pool and 9-hole golf course, and recreation programs through our Regional Recreation Commission. The current prevailing wage threshold of $25,000 has been in effect since 1963, with no adjustments for the inflation that has occurred during that time period. This arbitrarily low threshold means that only a very few small projects that the borough needs to undertake end up not being subject to the excessive costs of prevailing wages. For example, the borough owns about a dozen different buildings that we maintain as part of our municipal operations: our borough hall, public works garage, water plant, sewer plant, etc. None of these buildings are huge, but they all have roofs that will require replacement. This is basic maintenance work, as no changes are normally contemplated to the structure in each case. But with all these roof replacement jobs, as an example, when they come due, they will all no doubt require prevailing wages to be paid because of the outdated threshold limit. We've budgeted this year to replace the roof on the bathhouse building at our swimming pool at our community park. The building is a masonry structure about 3,300 square feet in size. That project should cost probably less than $25,000 to replace that roof. But with prevailing wages, the project will no doubt end up costing the borough $35,000 to $40,000 due to the mandated inclusion of prevailing wage costs. And then multiply that each time we have to do that kind of job for our municipal facilities, the same thing applies. House Bill 796 would increase the prevailing wage threshold for municipal public works contracts to $100,000, which would be a reasonable limit and enable our borough, as well as all municipalities, to perform many maintenance-type projects without being subject to the excessive costs of the prevailing wage mandate. I'd like to switch for 1 minute here and state that the borough would also support House Bill 665, which would eliminate the costly requirement that municipal road maintenance projects now subject to the prevailing wage law. I'm sure you're all familiar with the state Supreme Court ruling in the Youngwood decision from 2008 that upheld the determination by the State Department of Labor and Industry that municipalities must utilize prevailing wage rates for road repaving work, where previous to that ruling, such repaving work was considered to be maintenance and not construction, and therefore did not require the use of prevailing wages. East Stroudsburg Borough maintains 23.66 miles of municipal roads, all paved. Our total liquid fuels tax allocation received from the Commonwealth this year was just over $179,000. In addition to road repaving, the borough utilizes its liquid fuels monies each year for road salt purchases and street lighting, in addition to typically paving. Since most of the borough roads are curbed, we are usually milling off the existing road pavement surface prior to repaving. So we almost always come under the mandate for use of prevailing wages with our annual road paving program. I don't think that anyone here would question that the effect of this ruling has been to significantly increase the cost for municipalities to perform one of the main functions of local government, the maintenance of local roads. I presented some figures which should be in your attachment there from the recent actual history of road paving work that we've undertaken in East Stroudsburg Borough to show in part how the cost of this prevailing wage ruling has impacted the ability of the borough to maintain our local roads. The attached chart shows that all our municipal paving work undertaken since 2009 has been subject to the prevailing wage mandate. Up until this year, our costs per ton of asphalt in place have gone up significantly each year. And please understand that the borough typically bids out our paving work on a price per ton basis, with the main item being, of course, the placing of the 1.5-inch wearing surface for the repaving, that being the main cost item. The total cost of the paving work, of course, also includes not only placing the wearing surface, but also the milling work, if that's being done, and a base course replacement or leveling course that is called for based on the specific road conditions. The bottom line is that with the additional costs of the prevailing wage mandate, our borough has had to cut back on the amount of road paving that we can budget to undertake. Our liquid fuels funding has not increased and has actually declined. That's obviously another issue for your consideration. But we have had to utilize more general fund monies for our paving work or reduce the amount of paving that we undertake. And frankly, we are not keeping up with our road repaving as we should in order to maintain the roads in the condition that they require. For example, with 24 miles of roads, if we were to plan on a 15-year cycle for repaving, we should be paving about 1.6 miles of roads per year on average. Even on a 20-year cycle, we should be doing about 1.2 miles of roads each year. As you can see from the chart, we are falling behind on the amount of road repaving work that we can afford to undertake with the existing resources available to us. And I would argue that we're not alone in this situation. This is probably the same situation that virtually every municipality is facing. Gentlemen and ladies, I would argue to you that House Bill 796 and House Bill 665 are sensible pieces of legislation that, if enacted, will help municipalities stretch our tax dollars and provide better services to our residents. We urge your support of these bills for the benefit of our municipal and school district entities. Thank you.
Jim, what stands out, in 2005 you did 0.78 miles of roads, 3/4 of a mile, and it cost you $70 grand. I know the blacktop has gone up a little bit, but the same paving 2010 cost you $201,000.
Yes, I mean
that's
and
of course the
sure. There's other factors in there too, depending on the scope of the work.
You paid a little bit more for blacktop, but at the same time,
but that is
that went prevailing wage on a repave. It went from $70,000 to $201,000.
Yes, that's a good point, Chairman.
Yeah, and my question, and I think and you alluded to it a little bit. How many? I've noticed more tar chipping being done, and we're not paving roads. Am I correct? Am I in Monroe County, Alan?
I took notice the state has been doing more.
Yeah, we've been doing it as well, but I've seen it also on local roads in local municipalities.
It helps preserve the life of the road. It's might give it another 2-3 years, depending on what the road conditions are at that particular time when they do it.
Because they don't have the money to pave it.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions? Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Phillips. I come from a small municipality, a borough in Berks County. It's 0.8 of a square mile. We have our own local police department. It's not a regional police department, our own fire department, and a number of parks. I since threaded in some of the testimony here, the property tax implications, and you're the manager in that municipality. And so could you define, not in a dollars and cents way, perhaps the magnitude of how it affects the local property tax, the current prevailing wage law, I mean, de minimis, significant. I received a phone call from a local borough councilman in our borough, and I used to serve on that same council, and he suggested there was a need for a change in the law. So not looking at this through an ideological lens, very practically, I received the phone call. He thought it was significant in our borough. What say ye?
Well, as I said, with, for example, with the paving work, with the costs continuing to go up, and since we have to bid it using prevailing wages, we're having to either, as I said, use more general fund monies to do our paving work, or else not do it. If we were to rely upon general fund monies, in our municipality, 1 mil of real estate taxes raises $67,000 per year. And as I said, we're a full-service municipality, regional police department. You know, we have those costs, obviously, that continue to go up. There's only just so far you can go with raising the real estate tax millage. And in our particular county, we're even more impacted because of the school district millage rates that are in effect. So it's just a situation that is not getting better. It's getting worse for municipalities.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Phillips. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Millard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phillips, you mentioned one thing through your testimony that I just want to point out to the members of this committee and the audience, and those of the members in the audience from organized labor, and that is that you're not really looking to increase the scope of your projects. You're just looking to do the same projects that you historically have done years ago when you could afford to do them under that existing prevailing wage law.
We're trying to maintain what we have. We're not arguing here that large new projects should not be, will not be subject to prevailing wages. We're talking about the basic maintenance type of activities that we always have performed and will continue to have to perform, and having a reasonable limit for prevailing wages that those projects will be subject to.
Well, I appreciate your comments here, and I just wanted to emphasize that we're not looking to rob anything or take anything away. It's just that the costs have crept up to the point where what historically was done can no longer be done under the current threshold.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next testifier is Frank Seriani, President of the Building and Construction Trades Council, and Abe Amoros, Pennsylvania Legislative Director of the Labor International Union of North America. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Frank, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Frank Sirianni, and I'm the president of the Pennsylvania State Building Trades Council, which covers the entire state. I'd like to thank you for allowing Abe and I to testify on behalf of Prevailing Wage and our members and workers of the state of Pennsylvania. Our council it consists of 113 locals and 16 regional councils, which collectively we represent about 136,000 construction workers in the state of Pennsylvania. And it's, you know, we do heavy highway, commercial buildings, private buildings, every type of construction in the state. A large portion of it is the utilities. Every power plant, every nuclear plant in the state of Pennsylvania was built by our members. And, you know, we have a pretty good grasp on the construction industry throughout our communities and throughout the state of Pennsylvania and nationally. We work collectively with 3,500 contractors in the state of Pennsylvania. That's 3,500 businesses that bid on prevailing wage projects and public sector projects. So I didn't send in any written testimony today because I just like to talk about the subject. I mean, this is probably the 20th hearing I've been to on. Yes, yeah, we all are on this, I believe. Now, I've only been doing it for 10 years, so that's not too long. And there was some controversy at the last hearing, and this, please don't take any offense, whether or not we should be having these hearings since the bills were all out of committee. I'm okay with that. you know, we feel that we can talk about this subject no matter what, and that will be addressed at other public hearings as well throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So as I move forward with my testimony, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Prevailing Wage Law, which was actually enacted to protect Pennsylvania businesses. It wasn't enacted to protect Pennsylvania unions, but it was enacted to protect Pennsylvania workers. And how this came about was a lot of contractors, like in your area here, you might have contractors coming down from New York or in from New Jersey, lowballing prices on projects. And since these are tax-funded projects, paid for by all of our members and constituents in the room and throughout the state, the legislature felt it was necessary to make sure that those tax dollars, to the best of their ability, stay in the state of Pennsylvania rather to go to outside contractors who would pay their taxes with our money in other states, buy their durable goods, buy homes, you know, buy their cars there. They would, you know, it would just undermine the local economies if a school or municipal building was being built by an out-of-state contractor. Now, it's not the save-all. The save-all for that is to have a project labor agreement, which at any time the committee would like to discuss how we can help keep those monies in the community by having project labor agreements in different areas. We'd be more than happy to sit down with the committee and discuss that. But there's several items that were stated today, and I'm sure that all the testifiers, when they testify, believe what they're saying, and they've been told this by architects or maybe by a lobbyist group that they've hired, which I think they pay for out of taxpayer dollars for their lobbyists. But I'm not sure about that. I'd have to check their 990s. So when we look at the cost-saving initiative, you know, there's a lot of things boroughs, like the Boroughs Association, you know, could do to save money. Like they could pay their director less than $236,000 a year, you know, things like that. And when we're talking about prevailing wage and materials, materials went up. Materials went up. Price of the job was in 2005 was 70 grand. Well, how much has fuel gone up since 2005? It's gone up a couple bucks, and that's all oil-based products and paving. So the project price has gone up, so we need to lower wages. And that's what these bills do. Whether you know it or not, they're asking to open up this market to outside people, outside your community, that'll come in here and lowball your local contractors. And that's what usually happens in a state without prevailing wage laws. Along with that, you have a lot of degradation in the training and education of construction workers. You know, apprenticeship programs have decreased in any states where they've gotten rid of prevailing wage, which a couple have. But a lot of those states are, you know, behind the curve from Pennsylvania anyhow. You know, our workers are so far ahead of some of those states. You know, it's amazing to think or even to say that you can save $1 on a project with either of these bills, because nowhere in either of the bills is there any indication that it says prices are going to go down or must go down because of this, or this is the exact amount of money that is going to be saved. You know, there's nothing in the bill. All it says is it's a philosophy. It's nothing to do. It doesn't save one taxpayer $1. This committee put out a bill on unemployment compensation, and you voted to float a bond for $4.5 billion to bail out businesses in Pennsylvania, and that was going to create more jobs. Well, our job base hasn't gone up very much at all. So when you're considering these bills, it's important to think of the worker, who are the taxpayers, that are bringing this money back to your community and are investing in the community. You know, $137,000 in wage increases on that project that was spoke of that went from $70,000 to $220,000 would probably equate to the oil cost, because our wages haven't gone up that much. You know, and let me answer some questions about how we get the rates in Pennsylvania. Well, one of the ways is that the Department of Labor sets them, and they have different avenues that they go to secure those rates. They look at your community and they want to know what is the prevailing rate, what is the most commonly paid rate in that area. Not the average rate, the most commonly paid. And they decide from submissions from the businesses and the unions, which is written into the laws, that the collective bargaining agreement shall be weighed in as part of the decision. So through that, those wages are ascertained for the local community. They're not outrageous. They're not the rates from Philly or Pittsburgh out here in Stroudsburg. You know, I think a carpenter makes around $28 an hour here. That's not too much, you know. And I know that, you know, we don't have, well, I can honestly say that everyone on this committee makes prevailing wage. I mean, there's no difference from your wage than the guy in Philadelphia, Representative Millard, than the guy in Pittsburgh as a legislator. So it's not an uncommon issue in the state of Pennsylvania to be consistent with wages. So everybody who is a taxpayer gets what they pay for. You're a good legislator, or they wouldn't reelect you, so you're doing a good job. That's why you make that money. We do the same thing. On the highway projects, we're not allowed to work on the highway projects from November to April. We don't get paid holidays. We don't get paid, on any of your projects, you don't get paid holidays, you don't get paid vacation days, you don't get paid rain days. So the time frame that someone works on one of these projects is very limited. Okay? So the wage might be, you know, a decent wage. You know, what does a laborer make here?
About 16 an hour.
16 an hour. That's not outrageous for this area. That's not outrageous for this building. I would want my son or daughter, or whoever I leave my small farm to at the end of the day, to make kind of that 16 to 20 bucks an hour. It's a family of 4, that's poverty level on a national average, $40,000 a year. It's not too much. It's not too bad. So I think that, you know, we need to look at the whole picture. We can't just say cost of materials went up, so we have to get rid of prevailing wage. It doesn't equate to any savings. If you put a bid out for a building, which the architects use the union wages in the area to estimate a project. Okay, you get an estimate for a project that's budgeted. They go by the standard in the area. So then the borough puts out a bid. They put it on the Dodge reports. It says, okay, $50,000 estimated cost. This bill doesn't say that the bids are going to come in at $40,000. They see $50,000. You're going to pay $50,000. That's how the bid process works. That's how the construction industry works. So there's just so much to this, and it's just not black or white. And I'd like to talk about the Youngwood decision, borough decision, because that came up a couple times too. Okay, that was an enforcement by the state Supreme Court of an existing law, which means anyone who didn't go by that law before that violated that law. So if a borough, township, county, or whatever didn't use those rates, they were in violation of the law, and the Supreme Court says that because they interpreted that law. And they all swore to uphold the law. So who should be responsible for that? The people that put those jobs out for bid and didn't go to find out if that was supposed to be that? That whole thing was based, and believe me, you need to know that those milling projects, and it's not just paving, it's milling and restructuring and resurfacing a road. And they were adding lanes and guardrails and exit ramps and footers and all these other things and saying, oh, that's maintenance. Well, they rebuilt the whole road, and part of the law says reconstruction. Okay? That was changed, and no offense to the past Governor Ridge, he's a personal friend of mine. That was changed under the Ridge administration in the Department of Labor and Industry. They sent a memorandum of understanding to the Department of Transportation and said, milling's no longer prevailing wage. And that was part of the evidence in the court case. And you know what? It wasn't even signed by anybody. Everybody just said, okay, let's do it. And you're talking about mandates. I hear mandates, 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 mandates. How about calling them responsibilities? If you're going to send state tax dollars down to a local government, or you're going to spend tax dollars as a public entity, shouldn't you have some responsibilities with the taxpayers' money? What? That you have to fill out payroll certifications. That's part of the Prevailing Wage Act. So every borough, everyone that worked on here, their name, social security number, and where they lived and what they did on this job is reported back to the Labor and Industry Department. It's an easy form. It takes 5 minutes to fill one out. But that way you know there's no undocumented workers on that project. And believe me, my grandparents were immigrants. I'm all for, you know, opening our doors and letting everybody in, but a lot of these people that are working on these jobs throughout our communities are undocumented workers. We catch them all the time. And it's not their fault. My God, I'm telling you what, if I was a if I came into Adams County and I was picking apples, I came in on an agricultural visa, and I saw what was going on in York County, Adams County, if I was down in York Springs, and I saw the nice houses, and I saw the schools, and I saw everything that everyone in the United States has, you're damn right I'd stay too, because it's a good place to live, and we're proud of it. But you know what? Those people are being exploited. That's why you guys passed the undocumented worker legislation that you passed, and that's why you passed the misclassification of worker. Those are good steps, but they don't go far enough, because if you don't have prevailing wage and you don't have documentation on those projects, and believe me, there's a lot of projects that a lot of your smaller local contractors are bidding on. It's their bread and butter every day that are prevailing wage, and it creates a level playing field for all of them.
It could be here for Maben, and thank you.
I have more if anyone wants to meet later.
Well, I'm sure. We'll gladly explore.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
We appreciate the opportunity to testify before you. Thank you for allowing the laborers to present this testimony regarding House Bill 665 and 796, which seek to fundamentally change the Prevailing Wage Act and the way workers are paid in Pennsylvania. My name is Abe Amoros, and I'm the Pennsylvania Legislative Director for the Laborers International Union, a business-friendly union, I might add, with more than 30,000 members throughout the Commonwealth and 23 locals, some of which are represented here today, and I thank them for taking the time from their schedules to be present. Mr. Chairman, as you know, prevailing wage was created at the federal level in 1931 with the passage of the Davis-Bacon Act, named after Senator James Davis from Pennsylvania and Representative Robert Bacon from New York. It was intended to protect local jobs because workers were coming up from Alabama at very cheap wages in that district. That law was signed by Herbert Hoover, a Republican president, on March 3rd, 1931. And in 1961, thanks to a Republican-controlled state legislature, prevailing wage laws in Pennsylvania have been successful in benefiting workers, families, and the communities in which they live. Mr. Chairman, these are good-paying and family-sustaining wages that stimulate the economy and allow workers to spend more in their local communities, and also allow municipalities to function through the use of sales taxes, property taxes, and other revenue-generating methods. However, the bills before this committee do absolutely nothing to help working people in Pennsylvania. In fact, they hurt them. The first argument against the current prevailing wage law is that it drives up the cost of construction. Some falsely claim that eliminating the prevailing wage will reduce the total cost of a construction project by anywhere from 10 to 30%. Mr. Chairman, I hear this everywhere throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So let's start there. Labor costs are typically only 19 to 24% of a total cost of a project, depending on the scope. Now, when you look at the actual numbers, you show how preposterous the claims of 30% savings could be. So for the sake of argument, let's take a bid of $1 million for a new construction project. If we split the difference of the usual labor cost on construction projects and use 22%, $220,000 would be the labor portion of the project. Now, obviously, any savings over 22% would be impossible unless the workers not only worked for free, but also contributed to the materials for the project. And several testifiers this morning have alluded to the fact of the increase in costs in terms of building materials. That is a known fact. The other issue that this committee should be aware of, I had a conversation with an appointed official in the Planning Commission for the County of Washington County, Western Pennsylvania. She was lamenting that before they even start work on a project, she has a $300,000 stack of paper this thick in engineering costs and studies before a single shovel is entered into the ground. So to look deeper at this issue, let's assume that we actually can save 10 to 30% on labor. The 10% claim would result in a savings of $22,000 or 2.2% of the total job cost, while 30% would equal about $66,000 at the high end of the claim. So can this 2.2 to 6.6% savings be actually realized? Contractors bid on projects. They're based on wages, cost of materials, and the estimated number of employees to complete the job on schedule. Now, for our purposes, consider a number of contractors consisting of union and non-union are bidding on a private job. Now, as Frank talked about, union wages are set and easily attainable, allowing the non-union contractor the advantage of adjusting the wage portion of the bid accordingly to gain an advantage in the bidding process. This does not guarantee that the wage portion of the bid will be passed on to workers. It could just as easily be kept as profit for the contractor. Without prevailing wage laws, Mr. Chairman, contractors are under no obligation, whether it's legal or moral, to pay their workers a determined wage or benefit. So I ask, how much of that savings will be passed along to taxpayers, or how much of that will be kept for profit? There is no mechanism in place that will allow a municipal official to honestly claim that a tax savings will be experienced. I don't know of any contractor, Mr. Chairman, in Pennsylvania who is going to pass along any tax savings to a school district, a county, a city, a township, a borough, or any municipality for that matter. And therein lies our frustration, Mr. Chairman, because it's a rather flawed and dishonest approach. Will taxpayers feel any relief? That's questionable. It makes one wonder if anti-prevailing wage legislation is based upon proven, sound, logical business practices or ideology. Now, we all know the realities in terms of unemployment, Mr. Chairman. In the construction industry, it's between 9 and 13%. That's a reality. That's a reality. While these numbers may be encouraging, the unemployment figures are much higher in the construction industry, of course, rather than the national unemployment rate, the state unemployment rate, and what the unemployment rate could be here in Monroe County. Changing the prevailing wage hurts our workers further by suppressing their wages, and it's really taking more from the bottom to pad the top. House Bill 665 would exempt maintenance work from the prevailing wage. Now, I ask any members of the committee, have any of you poured cement for curb work, laid heavy pipe, or nailed guide rails in the smoldering sun? These are highly skilled workers who require a significant amount of training and precision that allows them to gain experience to provide quality projects on time, on budget, and done correctly the first time. There's your tax savings. So why would members of this committee or the legislature be interested in suppressing their wages? Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to spare you the testimony on the next 2 pages because they cite several studies which you could read at your leisure. These are independent studies. They're not union-funded studies. They come from universities. They come from think tanks throughout the nation that talk about the economic impacts of high wages throughout the construction industry and the importance of training as well, because these prevailing wages also allow unions to have these wonderful training facilities at no cost to taxpayers to provide the very best in terms of work. So I ask members of this committee and the legislature to create jobs and put all of your energy this fall into the passage of a comprehensive transportation bill that will put tens of thousands of people back to work while fixing our crumbling roads and highways. We need that, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to skip along to House Bill 796, which is a $25,000 threshold, which this bill would aim to raise it to $100,000. Workers should be compensated fairly according to their craft. You know, we're only asking for an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. The average wage of a construction worker is $35,000, and as Frank alluded to, if he or she is the only breadwinner in the family, that's less than the average household income in Pennsylvania. And construction workers are not wealthy people, and they don't necessarily work 12 months out of the year. And again, Frank alluded to this. When it rains, they don't work, and when they don't work, they don't get paid. And they don't work 12 months out of the year. In fact, to make ends meet, they apply at places like Sheetz or the local grocery store to make a living for their families. We cannot continue along this downward spiral, or as many would say, a race to the bottom. Members of the state legislature should be more concerned with creating jobs, allowing current laws that support workers to remain in place, rather than creating barriers for them, which hurt their families, and many of whom are your constituents. You know, in Pennsylvania, construction workers are facing some serious issues, and they look to the state legislature and their elected officials, local, state, federal, for relief in terms of job creation policies rather than implementing laws that only hurt them in the long run. We're opposed to these bills, obviously, because they hurt workers and they do nothing for local economies. So let's support laws and policies that have a proven track record providing good-paying and family-sustaining jobs for generations of Pennsylvanians. Thank you for listening, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just a couple of comments. We checked with the chief clerk. There's 14 prevailing wage bills in front of us, and it is allowable. This was allowable. Otherwise, I would have canceled it. I wasn't at the last meeting.
The last meeting I was told, I can't hear. The last meeting I was told, or we were all told, that the hearing was on two particular bills that were already dismissed, and the announcement was for the two particular bills.
Even with, but even speaking with to those two bills, you know, I just want to understand that we did clarify with the chief clerk, and we just we actually put the change in the advertisement for the others. There's 14 bills in front of us. One has a 500,000 annual. Raise the threshold of 500,000. You know what's in front of us. You know, there's a tremendous amount of bills. I just have one question. Is the same person that's figuring out what the cost actually is figure this one out? Millions? Are you guys kidding?
I didn't see that.
Millions?
I'd have to read that.
I give back 30% of my salary every year, but millions?
I didn't see it.
I probably, if you figure out the average that I make per hour, it's under $10 an hour when you consider the hours that we put in. I'm sorry. I just had, you know, to put that out there. Bad guys. Sorry, you know, you wasted taxpayer dollars. No, it's your money. But guess what? Who paid for it? You know, you worked if you worked prevailing wage jobs, you paid for it. I think we need to do something. 25,000 back in 1963. If the cost of the item was $24,999 and the labor was $1, it had to go out there. Look at cost today, guys. You know, I've been pressured by people in my committee to go 180 to try to do 189,000. You saw it last year, Frank, what they were trying to do. You talk about creating jobs, and we want to create jobs. You heard from members here that, you know, from folks out there on the front lines, that they're not doing jobs because they can't afford to do it. And they're tarring, chipping roads. Now, I didn't ask because one of the gentlemen was, they're tarring, chipping roads rather than paving a road because they don't have the money to do it. And that's people that would be working. There's another comment that was made, and then I'll make you make some comments, about out of state. Out of state guys are coming in now and bidding prevailing wage, aren't they?
Yes, but our contractors in the area have a level playing field, so they can't, you know, they know their materials costs, they know their wage costs in advance.
But they're here now. They are here now.
And a lot of them violate the law and have been caught and bring in undocumented workers, which happened at Mansfield University. It's happened at
So even with prevailing wage, that's happening, you're saying?
Well, I'm saying it's happening, and that's what we should be addressing rather than cutting.
And wages. I don't have a problem there. I don't have a problem looking at that. You mentioned I'm going to talk to you about that later. Yeah. Any questions from any of the members? Yes. Want to start that? Good.
Do I get to respond to any of that, or about the threshold?
Okay. Well, go ahead quickly.
It's real quick. Go ahead. Okay, I'm a glazier by trade, and if you go in the Capitol, which you all go in the Capitol quite frequently, I see you all there. All the glass that's on top of the area down by the cafeteria. Now, you walk under that every day. It's very dangerous. You have to walk on the glass up there when you put that in. Okay, and back when that was installed, and this was just 20 years ago, the way projects were done, we would have had to set up scaffolding in there. There would have been, 20 people on that project doing that. With modernization and mechanization, less than 5 people would do that job now. So modernization and mechanization has caught up for inflation on projects because materials aren't handled the same way. There's more tools. There's jobs 1 hour. I want to get paid a decent wage. And $25,000? So you're saying some people, don't deserve prevailing wage and some whatever you can throw at them is good enough, and we have a bunch of people that are making like minimum wage jobs. We don't want minimum wage jobs in Pennsylvania. We want good paying wage jobs.
I agree with you.
I'm sorry.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. And Mr. Sirianni, you actually brought this up during your testimony, comparing the two jobs, and I ran some quick numbers, and somebody might want to double check my math. But in 2005, the project was 0.78 miles, $70,503. 2010, it was another 0.78 mile project for $201,418 and 81 cents. And I actually used your counterpart's low estimate that 19 to 24%. I just used 20%. For labor, that would come out to $14,100 for the first project, $40,283 for the second project. That's a 65% increase during that time frame. And I know you alluded to the fact that your wages didn't go up that high.
Right.
So I also checked the gas prices. Gas prices went up about 38% during that same time, while materials went up 36%. So my question is, understand that there's all kinds of moving pieces.
Right.
Are your workers making the same wages, even if it's only 20% of the component? Are they making the same wages they were in 1960? Either, but my point is, if wages is a component of the total bid, why would you be opposed to reflecting the aggregate of that total bid to that new number?
Well, first of all, when the testifier was testifying about those figures, he was saying that the cost per ton had increased so dramatically. I was just equating it to gas prices as a general rule, but believe me, asphalt's gone up more than gas, and you know the asphalt price has gone up, but there's an allowance now to put the milling in it, which is taxpayers' property, and it goes back to a site, and the people that are applying it put it in the mix, and they sell it back to the state, and they get it for free. So they're charging you the same price for the aggregate with the millings in it as they are for fresh pavement. So you know, there's a lot of numbers moving here, and it's not the wages that have moved so much. And you know, when you get right down to it, those paving projects, area, so a lot of hours going to nuclear power plants, high-rise buildings, supermarkets, and the things we do on a regular basis, they all get weighed in, and it has to be a number factor. But we're talking about the federal rates, and the threshold's $2,000, so are we going to move on that?
Well, just so I'm clear, though, you support the manner in which the federal wage rates are calculated.
We comply with it.
Okay. Would you support that similar approach in Pennsylvania? The private sector project weight data.
It's already part of the law.
Is utilized in Pennsylvania. So you would be supportive of that, just to be clear.
I'm supporting good wages here today. How we get there is my best route.
Okay. I'll take that as sort of a yes. Or no impact on the quality of public school building construction, and the LSC found indications that the exemption had little impact on the wages of construction employees working on construction of public school and buildings. That was the Legislative Services Commission. So I just raised those points because we've got data, we've got research that points in various directions. So you're welcome to respond to that, but it would be very helpful to know the studies that you cite, if you could provide the specifics on.
Absolutely, and you mentioned the Mackinac Policy, or Center for Public Policy in Michigan. I'd like to take a look at that study as well to see how it's funded and where it's come from also. So I'm more than happy to exchange all of the data, all of the studies and information, and have a very healthy debate in public for the next two public hearings that are scheduled.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
If
sir.
I may, if you can get the copies of your studies to me, and I'll get it to the representatives.
Yes,
and
sir.
the representative, you can get me a copy of that. I'll also share that with the members as well.
If I may make just a couple comments.
We have a couple more.
Oh, okay.
So that you're going to get some more. Might get the question again.
Sure.
Representative Gillen.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate your passion on behalf of your membership, and I think we do have some common ground with regard to good-paying jobs. My dad was a steel worker, as well as the influence of illegals in the labor market. On a lighter note, Abe, I have wheelbarrowed concrete around and carried forms. Okay, you asked if anybody up here had done that kind of work. I can still do it. It just feels different the next morning. Frank, you had mentioned prevailing wage. I'm actually not receiving prevailing wage. I returned my cost of living allowance back to the Commonwealth. So I could well use it with 5 daughters. Everybody keeps needling me about impending weddings. But specifically, a question for both of you. The prior testifiers obviously starkly at variance with the testimony that you've given. Is there any possible common ground here? You hear something that resonates either on the threshold, the inflation, anything legitimate, common ground on the other side, property tax concerns have been expressed here, and these are well-meaning office holders, and
I agree.
they certainly have the public's best interest at heart.
I agree. I have no personal problem with any borough or township supervisor. I think they do a great job. We did a big common ground thing last session when the counties, boroughs, township supervisors, and the school districts asked to raise the threshold on no-bid contracts, which means they didn't have to advertise for projects they were doing. That was a $10,000 threshold that they would have the responsibility that they would have to, put it out for public scrutiny. Now, we fought that for years. So we've said, well, look, they're saying it's going to save $300 million in newspaper advertisements, and that would be a real big help to the local communities and the taxpayers. So against our better judgment, because of the fact that contracts will be done over the phone and people will be solicited over the phone rather than the public scrutiny, we went along with that to save the boroughs and township monies. That was a big step for us. We thought that was a give-me for them. I mean, really, we didn't care originally if they if they wanted to call Bill's Auto and get a car or their computers and all that. But when it came to construction, it was our issue, and they wanted to raise that threshold, and then there was an escalator put in it too. So now there's all these jobs out there that they're doing right now that they don't have to put out for a public bid or public notice. And that saved, according to their figures, $300 million in advertising costs. So, we went along with that in an effort to meet them halfway. And the next thing is they want to come right back and say, well, we want to cut workers' wages. Listen, about our contract, our wages anyhow, and they're used in most of the areas in prevailing wage. They're negotiated in the private sector in the free market with businesses in Pennsylvania. They're not negotiated with the state. We negotiate in the free market. If the Bill's Plumbing down the road, who's a union contractor, we negotiate with Bill's Plumbing. The plumbers negotiate with Bill's Plumber here in Stroudsburg and say, well, we can't get more than the free market will allow, or we wouldn't work at all. Because, there's been a moratorium on money from government money to the schools. The PlanCon money, there's a moratorium put on that. Sure, that has to hurt people. That has to hurt the schools. That has to hurt construction. We would like to see that moratorium lifted in so we can go back to constructing schools for our children. But, we have made a big movement, And there was a talk, well, we wanted to raise it to $600,000, but we compromised and said $100,000. Well, who did you guys compromise with? I wasn't at the meeting. Thanks. I wasn't at the meeting.
We'll gladly invite you. If you can, because we're running late here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's it? Representative Pfeiffer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sirianni, for being here, and all the gentlemen and women and folks that are here today. I don't sit on the House Labor Committee. I represent a general area here in the Poconos, and I've kind of been outside of this discussion because I'm not on the committee. But it just seems to me that the economic realities that are occurring through inflation. Look, wages are more. We accept that. We want your wages to be more, right? This is America. But material costs are more. And really, we're hamstrunging our supervisors, our borough officials, our school districts by not increasing this rate as well. I mean, I don't think it's, we can sit here and fight about the labor part or the material part, but the fact is, the reality is that this amount probably needs to be increased for materials and labor because to account for inflation. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I think we started out at 188. Representative Scavell talked about a bill at 500. No one wants to hurt labor here. We just want to give those tools to our township officials that need them. And look, I've got townships that have 90 miles of their own roads, and a lot of their budgets are challenged because of storms and winter. And 2 years ago, we didn't have a tough winter here. So they had a few extra dollars in their budget to maybe pave entrances of intersections so the buses don't skid on dirt and gravel. And it was actually safety issues that really were probably pretty good, and we were doing them. Our township officials were doing them because they had the money. But here's a situation where really we've got to look at the overall economics since 1961 and say, hey, look, we need to make an adjustment. And if you're willing to sit at the table, I think it's something we need to work with. I mean, this isn't about hurting labor. It's about giving our tools to our supervisors and some of our local officials that work so hard. You just want to comment on that?
I appreciate your position on that, and I've had a fortunate opportunity to negotiate quite a few contracts and things in my day, which I don't do a lot of anymore, but I would love to bring a list of things that we'd like to the table and come up with some kind of agreement on those issues too. I mean, there's no enforcement of the prevailing wage law right now, and that's an obligation. Well, I shouldn't say no. It's very limited, and there's people that have violated the prevailing wage law. In other words, they submit a bid knowing the specs in advance, and that's not a $25,000 project. This could be $1 billion project for all I know, and hundreds of millions of dollars that were bid, and then they paid the wrong rates on the wages, and then they decided, and they got caught, and they were told, pay the right rate or we're going to debar you. Well, then they were debarred. They were debarred. The Department of Labor did the right thing and debarred them. But that's the end of it. To me, that's white-collar crime. First of all, you're falsifying bid documents, you're sending in different reports, all those things.
I agree with you. And if it means doing something like that to trade for make sure that there's better enforcement, I'll gladly sit down with you.
We need to make sure the taxpayers are paying for something they get.
I have no problem with that at all. But, there's got to be a little give and take, and that's basically what we're trying to accomplish. Representative Millard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frank and Abe, I'm going to address you by first name basis, if that's fine with you. Frank, I thought you were going over my whole job description where I used to work when you
I was going to. You're an
mentioned about
IBEW member.
concrete and everything. But what I wanted to mention here and highlight again today is let's not lose the focus of what this bill is. This bill is to increase a threshold that is 50 years old. It's not being utilized to necessarily increase scopes of work, although some of that could possibly happen, I suppose. But this is to provide, as Representative Pfeiffer said, a tool to our townships, and there are hundreds of them out there, that cannot do what they previously did years ago with a $25,000 threshold. So I don't, anytime there's legislation that is proposed, you always listen to the individuals that express to you their desire to make changes and everything. And I try and separate a lot of things when I'm working on legislation. I don't think that there's any greed involved here or trying to shut out any labor groups. They're welcome to bid, as they always have been. I think that this is not greed. It is a true need that's been expressed by our townships to be able to facilitate those projects they've always done. And I just have one question for you, and that is that in an effort to compromise, and you heard that there were all kinds of proposals here, I really felt that this was a compromise with no inflationary index, bringing it into the reality of what some costs have been in recent years. My only question to you is, in an effort for compromise, what would your threshold be?
Well, as I stated earlier, I feel every hour I work is worth the dollar value that I'm entitled to. And, you know, there's some states that don't have any threshold. And the federal threshold is $2,000. Of the 16 states that do have, well, let me find my notes here. There's, if you raise the threshold to $100,000, that'll make us the 4th highest threshold in the United States out of the 16 states that have thresholds lower than us, okay? Out of the 32 states that have thresholds. So, you know, it becomes, to me, is a look like a race to the bottom rather than to keep things where they should be. The big thing is, you know, our members, our future members in the construction industry, we want to be able to offer them a life-sustaining job, you know, a family-sustaining value. So I think that every dollar, you go to a doctor's office and the doctor's sitting there and, you know, he spends an hour with you. He doesn't say, okay, well, I took your temperature, so I'm only going to charge you for the nurse on that. You know, he charges you the full amount, you know. So, I mean, you do a public project, the law was to benefit the taxpayer.
Well, you indicated a willingness to entertain some compromise, and I really stand behind the amount that I've proposed here, which was 75, was amended, as you know, in committee to 100. But we'll leave it at that I'm always open for discussion with you, with any group, in addition to township supervisors and everybody. My door is always open, and you know
I appreciate that. And my comments were that there was talk of $500,000, and you guys came up with $100,000 as a compromise, and I said I wasn't invited to that negotiations. Right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Frank.
I believe there's about 6 states. We'd be about, this was 18 without prevailing wage, am I correct? And we'd be 6th with another 3 states at 100 if we went that route. But, you know, if you folks have a few moments afterwards, I'd like to sit down, both of you. Okay? Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for coming down.
Thank you.
Last testifier is Glenn's just submitted. He's not here? Okay. We have testimony from Glenn Phillips, Secretary Treasurer of Phillips Brothers Electrical Contractors. If any of the folks in the audience want testimony, his testimony, I believe we have copies there. Any final comments from any of the members? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending. As you can see, there's 2 sides on every issue, and on this particular issue has been debated for the last 20-some-odd years. That I know of, but it's probably since '63. I'm sure some of the folks in this room could probably hear that it's been going on since '63 and every year since then. But I truly appreciate the attendance, and I'm going to continue to look and negotiate. And I'm going to speak to the gentleman here. If there's a way that we can really look at the prevailing wage law and make sure that if there are any openings there for someone to do something illegally, we do not want that to happen. Thank you very much. The meeting's adjourned.